Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Today we're going to be talking, first of all, about villains and are they necessary? And then we'll be talking a little bit about quoting reviews. But to start us off with the villain question, Audrey.
Okay, so there was a question, what should we talk about this time? And I remembered reading at least one, maybe two things about how to make your villain um, approachable or human or fully fleshed out or something other than just a cardboard villain. And I thought that got me thinking. I thought, first of all, do we really need a villain in every story? Or is it really there's the protagonist and the antagonist? And so maybe antagonist is what you call a villain in literary fiction. So there's that. So we can kick these ideas around. But my own feeling is that you're probably at a disadvantage if you have a character that right from the start you've identified as a villain. Even in stories that kind of need one, like thrillers and crime fiction and certain kinds of types of fantasy, where there's one person who's inherently evil and their whole purpose in the story is to cause problems and struggle with and maybe defeat the protagonist or hero of the story. But it seems to me if you start with a character like that, they're bound to be cardboard. That the only way that really the best villains, in my mind, are the ones that sort of show up. They're characters that you've introduced for some other purpose, and as you write, and of course I'm in part, I think, a pantser, or more a pantser than an outliner and planner. As you write, your characters take on more sort of characteristics and habits and ways of speaking, and role in the story might change, and one of them may emerge as the villain. And to me, those are much better villains than ones that are sort of created specifically for that role. Now, to speak of my own works, when I first started writing that Herbert West story, he was going to be a villain. And it didn't quite work out like that. And in fact, I'm not sure who you could tap as the villain in the first book. Maybe the Miskatonic professors who were trying to make life hard for Herbert. But anyway, so there was that. And then down the road in the series, there was a character that I create specifically to be a villain, which was well, anyway, one guy. And every time I reread those books or have a look at them or think about them, I kind of cringe about that one character. I think, oh man, he's just so obviously a villain type that maybe I should have done something different with him and made him enter the story in a different way. But so anyway, that's my thought on villains. Plus, I think some types of fiction don't need a character with that label attached to them, although they might have a character who's in conflict with the main character, and that will create the substance of your story. So I'm interested to hear what the rest of you think about this.
I'll actually go first, because there's a lot to unpack there.
Yeah.
Honestly, I get a feeling that after we're done and I watch, this again, I'll say, "Oh yeah, I wanted to bring that up and that up and that up." There's a lot I may forget. But one thing, protagonist, antagonist, at least at that level, I think most, but not all, most stories do benefit from having that dynamic relationship. And to your point, we're not talking necessarily hero and villain. You're just sort of the main character, usually the protagonist, has a drive, a goal, or whatever, or is retelling his life or her life. And then you have the antagonist, is whatever holds that back. And for some reason, when you were bringing it up, I have no idea why, but an example of an antagonist that's not even a person. Doesn't have to be a person, the antagonist, right? Could be fate, could be anything. But instead, I was thinking the Andromeda strain, where it's, this alien microbe is the antagonist. They have to stop it before it spreads. So, and, there's no intent or will behind that thing. It's just a microbe. So there is that. Don't drink yet. Uh, so there is that. But to get to hero or heroine and villain, I started thinking about my own. When you sent that email, I started thinking about my own work. As you said with yours, he could have been a villain, and then but morphed to a different type character. And I remember at least the first thing that came to mind was, Perseus kills his grandfather because that's a classic hero story. I didn't create the story. And as I always say, I followed to it. But I do remember when I watched the movie, the first Clash of Titans, where they had Danae and her child cast into the water by her father, and they overlaid Christian elements on it. Actually, had brought shame to the family by having a child out of wedlock. That's what he was screaming at her, and that's why he was casting her into the ocean to die. And I'm like, no, no, that wouldn't have been it. So I, did my research. I knew the story anyway, but I did a little more research about the King Acrisius, and I thought it would be worth it to give him more depth because it was there. It wasn't ever explicit, but if you read his myth tale, the little details about it, his brother and its constant antagonism, you could at least give him reasons for doing what he did. They may not be good reasons, but they may be logical reasons, which brings me to the next point, which is I want to first, before I mention this point, explicitly state that I am a big fan of the concept of characters do not need backstories. In fact, for the movie industry, please stop giving everyone a backstory. Okay, you don't need it. You don't need it. You can have a great story without having to delve into everyone's past life and why they are what they are. It can work, and there's some great stories that have backstories or are backstories. But I'm just saying, I think I'm reading it more and more in people's work that you think you need an entire backstory. But in this case, like with Lucretius, I did judge some of that up because sometimes you need to give depth to simply give a better reason for that point of the story. So again, I'm making plot king there, and just throwing your daughter that you've treasured and her infant son into the water, and the myth even says that he knew what he was doing, and he knew that she was going to be protected. At some versions of the myth, but I need to do that. Whereas the other villain of the story, which is Paradisus, I can't remember now, but uh, I just kept them two-dimensional because it wasn't important. It was the end goal was for Perseus to stake his claim, protect his mother, and and just actually just do that, to become an adult and protect his mother. So you really didn't need anything. It could have been a microbe, to go back to my first point. So yeah, I think villains you can benefit by giving them some depth, et cetera, but not as a rule that you think you need to. As far as their role as antagonists, that can work really well. I just think we're at a point where you maybe want to go a little bit beyond the Bond, Mr. Burns antagonist, which is just, single dimension. You don't have to give them too many details, but they should have a motive. Because, oh, that's what I also wanted to bring up. Because and this is important to me, because the devil and the wolf and all that we talked about ad nauseum, good and evil. Every single person, I love this quote, everybody thinks they're the hero of their own story. So just bear in mind as you're writing your villain, that's all. You don't have to give everyone everything about them. But when you're writing your villain, remember that they think they're doing the right thing or what's good for them. And like some of my villains from Devil and the Wolf were motivated simply by greed or pride, etc. It's just very human qualities, and some of them were human. So I try to look at it like that. So that's my whole take on villains. Um, did I ramble too much there? We do.
I think we all learn at the very beginning of our writing career, whether we read it from books or we hear it from a tutor or a mentor or something, that every story has to have a point. your main character has to have something to overcome. The main character will change from page one to page whatever at the end. They will have had a life-changing experience. They will have overcome or succumbed to challenges that come along the way. They will have come out on top, if you like, or they possibly will have just died from a drug overdose. I mean, just depends on which way your villain, your character wants to go. And as Richard said, it could be a microbe, it could be a plague, it could be an avalanche, it could be, but very often, if they're not living in the Swiss Alps and they don't have surrounded by germs, they've had all their inoculations, for example, then we will invent somebody that will thwart them in whatever they want to do. And the other point that you made, Richard, which again, I actually taught, again, something I picked up along the way, and I think it's really important. Even if you don't give anyone a backstory, what you should do, or what they advise, is that you sit down and you do a brief CV birth to present day when the story starts, so that you understand and you can be credible explaining why your heroine hero actually acts the way he did. I mean, you don't have to sort of say in the dialogue he was beaten with a cucumber by his mother when he was 3 and therefore he's a raving sociopath, but you can, if you've got that in your mind and you've got it on a piece of paper or in your notes somewhere, you'll understand why he's reacting. And he doesn't necessarily have to go to the market and see a load of cucumbers on sale. I'm not saying that kind of thing, but it shapes his character and his reactions so that he comes across as authentic. The other thing about villains is that they're neither 100% bad or 100% good. You can't just say he is totally and utterly bad through and through, unless he's a raving sociopath with no empathy and no compassion. But I think it's quite interesting if you've got a villain who finds a mouse with a broken leg and takes it in and heals it partway through just to sort of throw a curveball at your reader, because all of a sudden they're hating this villain or the person who's thwarting your adorable, loving heroine hero that you really want to succeed. And then the villain, who you're sort of going, no, 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 then does something quite sweet. Again, that's just a bit of psychology, I guess. But whether your villain is nature, whether it's misfortune, whatever, you've definitely got to have a challenge for your main character to overcome, to build themselves, to improve themselves, to whatever, just come out on top.
I just to go back to something you said quickly. I find that CV or whatever you do create, my biggest reason for doing it is it helps you with dialogue too. Otherwise, you run into this when you do have your villain or your antagonist start to speak, it becomes wooden. So just having that background gives a little more texture to the dialogue. As you said, you don't have to have the scene where they see a whole cart full of cucumbers or something, but you know what's driving them, and that helps when you're writing their dialogue.
Um, so when I saw that we were going to be talking about this, thank you for the suggestion, Audrey. My initial response was, in my head, was, I don't even think about this. This is another one of those things that when I'm writing, I don't really think about. Is there a villain? Isn't there? It's just when I start writing, I have an idea and I start writing it. And if there's going to be a villain or an antagonist, that comes naturally from out of the idea, and eventually it happens. And like you, Lucinda, I absolutely cannot stand perfect heroes, perfectly good, brilliant heroes, and perfectly evil villains. And the best example I can come up with is Tom Clancy. I read a bunch of Tom Clancy books when I was in my 20s, but at some point I just got tired of it because Jack Ryan and whoever else the hero was in his books was always perfect, was always brilliant, was always this, was always that. And then the villains were, evil, but they're also stupid and they never hit their targets. Which brings up another example just from last night. For some really weird reason, I felt the compulsion to watch the original The Mummy movie last night. And the bad guys never hit their targets.
The 1999.
The good guys hit their targets. What?
The 1999.
What?
Not 99, not
Yes.
the original, but yeah,
Yeah,
99.
because I'm thinking
Yeah,
Boris
right.
Karloff for a moment
Yeah.
there. And
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. There's an original one from farther back, but the 1999 version, but I get tired of that part of that kind of genre of story, the perfect hero, the perfectly stupid villain. And so when I write, again, if I think about it at all, I want my good guys. I don't want the main characters to be perfect. I want them to have flaws. And it's the same thing with the villains. They're not perfectly evil and they're not always stupid. Sometimes they hit the target. I just, so like I said, I think, stories need conflict. How do you get conflict without having some kind of person who's playing the role of spoiler or bad guy or something? So I think that's what I have to say at this point.
I think we're so far all in agreement of that. Like the stuff I wrote, and it's the same thing. I don't want a perfect hero, and I don't want a perfect villain because, first of all, even on fiction, it's a little too unbelievable. And even the example of the psychopath, the crazed psychopath, in their mind, they may think that they're gods in their mind, but again, they don't think they're destroying for maybe it's their whim or their purpose, but there's always something there that I don't want to use the word redeemable, but is depth. It's not perfectly evil for evil's sake. I just don't think it never rang true with me. And good for good's sake, it can't be a perfect hero. I don't know. It's like telling a story then. There's a good guy and there's a bad guy,
Yeah.
and the good guy wins. End of story.
Yeah, why bother?
Yeah.
I my first novel, One Night in Bridgeport, is about a guy who's accused of a crime and he spends some time in jail and he has a public defender and it's up in a little town in the eastern Sierra Nevada. And whenever he's in jail and his public defender comes for a visit, he reminds her that he wants her to bring him a cheeseburger. And I got a review where the guy said, "Come on, he's in jail. He's going to be charged with sexual assault or rape or whatever. And the only thing he cares about is a cheeseburger." Well, no, that wasn't really the only thing he cared about, but it was a way to kind of make him human.
Right.
And that apparently was too much for one reader.
Right. And in fact, honestly, one of the reasons why I like throwing food, and it's funny you should say that, one of the reasons I love throwing food in some of my stories is it's one of the most human, characteristics we have when we eating, sharing food, whatever. It doesn't matter, but it brings everything down to sort of some sort of connection to our reality. So
Yeah.
Well, they're talking about reality. I did have a very long argument. We didn't fight over it, we didn't shout, but we certainly had an argument because my other half, bless him, suggested that he hadn't actually seen my heroine pee for the whole book. And I said, well, we do talk about people eating together, and dancing together, but you don't really want to go into that sort of depth. And he said, but it's not natural. She should have popped off behind a bush now and again or something like that. And I have put my foot down and said, she is not going to commune with nature in my book. People will just have to slot it in as and when they want, if they want it at all.
okay, this made me think of old movie Murder by Death, where Peter Sellers' character, which is a takeoff on Humphrey Bogart's character, tells everybody, "Stop." They're starting to give their theories of who killed how am I. He goes, "Stop! I got to go to the can, and I don't want to miss anything." And he runs off screen. And I'm like, that doesn't happen all the time, but it happened there.
Yeah, I actually have a few instances of someone needing to pee or going to pee, or I don't go into details, but I've mentioned that in a couple of my books. Yeah.
I don't think I've ever done that yet. One of my books, the one that has been unpublished, a friend read it, and at one point she commented because I went through such meticulous detail in some places about like daily activities. Why don't you talk about when he had to pee? It's like that, it's irrelevant.
Again, I haven't, but I will if there's a reason in the story
Right.
for it. Like, for
Exactly.
instance, if it's a comedy, everything backs up or whatever, and now they're trapped in this bathroom and they're at the in-laws' house and they don't want, whatever, an embarrassing situation. Yeah, I will. But if there's not a reason, maybe
Mm-hmm. So, Bertold, you definitely have villains in your stories.
I do.
yes,
Yes, I have villains, and part of that might just be that that's sort of like Lucinda was talking about the sort of the default setting, at least for the sort of story I end up writing. I do, with maybe one exception, I do try to make them three-dimensional villains who are like I think you should be able to relate to what they're doing. I
yeah,
was going to bring up on the topic of having a villain who's just absolutely evil, like Lord of the Rings, for example. You've got a villain who is just, he's not even human, he's just sort of a manifestation of pure evil that just exists, and we understand, well, Sauron just does evil things because that's what he does. So I think maybe in a fantasy type of story, you can get away with that. But in a more realistic or grounded story, I agree, it typically doesn't work. The other thing I'll say is I recently watched a movie called Nausicaa, which is it's a Japanese anime film from like the 80s. It's a fantasy, and one of the things about it is there is no real villain. You've got competing factions. There's like these different villages in a post-apocalyptic world, um, and there's conflict, and occasionally people do bad things to each other. But you can, in every case, you can sort of understand why they would be doing it. And what their motivation is. So, as much as anything, the conflict originates from uh, misunderstandings or just misaligned needs of different communities rather than anybody's just said, I just think it would be funny to go out and be really mean to people. There's nothing like that.
that's moving it more into the protagonist antagonist, where maybe the environment or human nature is really the antagonistic element that they're
Yeah, yeah. So I think a story like that, it, it can definitely work if you think of not really having a villain. I almost think you could sort of get away with having a perfect hero if you have no villain. And you could possibly get away with having a just absolutely evil villain if you also have some flawed heroes. Going back to Lord of the Rings, I mean the heroes are pretty good, but they do have their issues. There's little, they're tempted, right, by the ring and so forth. Um, so they have their flaws. But yes, I agree. When you get a story that's like we have the perfect hero and we have just an absolutely evil bad person, like you were saying, Mark, Tom Clancy, at least later on in his books, it did get to be that way, and it was just boring and predictable. I do think, and then this is a criticism of myself, is that I'm probably kind of lazy and that I'm just like, well, let's just throw in a villain here. But the problem though is the villains are always such fun to write. The villain is usually more fun to write than the hero. um, so so it's tempting for that reason.
you
I
know,
think you made a good point about the difference between human heroes and what I'll say are supernatural heroes and villains. Example of Sauron in or Saruman in Lord of the Rings versus human villains like in Tom Clancy books or whatever. it's def, and I think that's the thing that I focus on is my stories are about human beings. I can't think of anything off the top of my head that had supernatural or otherworldly type characters. They're about human beings. Human beings are flawed. They're not perfectly evil. They're not perfectly good. So why them human beings and not turn them into some kind of um, superhuman or something like that? Treat them like the humans that they are.
Okay, a lot of this depends on genre, I think. And I think in some cases, I think in fantasy you can, I mean, Lord of the Rings is a fantasy, and that sort of supervillain and heroic hero thing works better in that genre. Whereas in the opposite end, which might be literary fiction, you really want it to be way more subtle and to have your human people with their flaws and their struggles and conflicts that just kind of come out of being human. So yeah, but I think if you have someone who's tapped as the villain, you have to make them more three-dimensional than just cardboard, depending on your genre. So, and I do like the idea, and I've used this before. I think I sort of use it unconsciously of kind of building up your main characters, their background without it won't come out in the story. You won't write it in, but you kind of know things about them and what kind of childhood they might have had or what sorts of traumas might have made them act the way they do in your story. It's kind of like doing research. They say like research should be like an iceberg where you only see 1/10 of it in the story, but you kind of have to do it and it's sitting there in your mind and I think that's where a lot of that comes out, where you sit down to write and stuff just shows up. And I think what it shows up from is the research and the thinking you've done and that sort of data bank of stuff you have about this story that you just kind of unconsciously draw on. And I think maybe more of us pantsers tend to have that in the background without even realizing it, whereas people who outline in detail will they know about that stuff. Like they might have interviews with their characters and deep background stuff that they've written down. And so, you kind of have to do the same thing in different ways about villains. So thank
I'm
you
like
for
you, Audrey,
commenting on
though.
that.
I mean,
Yes.
I start writing, and you're talking about planning and Panther and that. I start writing, and I can have my villain and my hero, whatever, whatever. And away, and I thought, suddenly it comes to me, well, hang on a minute, why don't we change this, or why don't we move that around? And why don't we put this on top or that on top or whatever? In other words, a totally divergent path. And if you've got a hero or even a villain that is living character in here, obviously, they take over. You just sit there and just put the keys on. Well, badly in my case. You just type away and they're taking you on the journey. They seem to have minds of their own, their thoughts of their own. And I don't sort of tend to sit down and think, how evil are you? How good are you? How perfect, etc., etc. So if you plan it step by step, I think you then box yourself in
Mhm.
and your villain stays as a villain all the time, or your hero stays as a hero. You don't allow that swerving from one side to the other, but that might not work for everyone.
Just because there's something Bertel said, and then something Audrey responded to on that. There are talked about this, but there are exceptions, at least two I could think of, where yeah, the perfect hero and the perfect villain. Because we talked, Audrey, you said it depends on genre, and I think two are parody. With parody, my gosh, parody works best if you use cutout two-dimensional characters because they're all supposed to just represent concepts and very clean and clear representations. And then the fun is just taking those cutout characters and, assembling something. So parody is definitely something where you can easily get away with the, flat two-dimensional characters. And then Bertold made me think of also homage is, I don't know, that's not a genre, but Mark with your stormtroopers that can never hit. Part of, I think, what Lucas was doing, and I'm not saying this was successful, but part was that homage to the old Westerns where you had the perfect hero and the perfect villain and the white hat and the dark hat. And, you know, I'm not going to go too deep in that as far as Lucas goes, but just in general, if you are doing a sort of a tribute to those older simplified concepts, then again, you want to do a Bond tribute, like, so then you're going to have those villains that just are out to destroy the world or etc. I think there are always exceptions to everything, obviously, and there are two. I think it depends as well just at the genre and what your goals are in the story. Yeah, so just want to bring that up. Did I kill that, or we're going to move on to the next?
Well, I think we're moving on to something.
Yeah, what was the next thing we had down there? Was
So our next thing I think was quoting reviews. Is this something should you quote a reader's review when pushing your books? Is this good, bad, pretentious? What I mean, uh from my perspective, I would say I like quoting reviews, but part of that is I write so many reviews. I think it would be cool if people quoted them. So I'm happy. If somebody likes my book, or maybe even if somebody didn't like my book but said so in an entertaining way, I could see quoting that. Uh,
Have you seen somebody suggest that it is pretentious to do that, or it's not something we should be doing?
Yeah, let me give background on that for me. So, again, my experience up until whenever it was, 2016, with reading books and getting books was, the published world. I didn't really know that much about indie publishing and all that, and it really wasn't quite there like it is now. So every book you buy has the back cover with all the quotes, right? So when I was going to create my first book and I was doing the graphics, well, my friends doing the graphics, I was assembling them for the book. They have these rules on Amazon, and it's still there as far as I can see. When if you're including wording on your book, they do not want you, or I think even in their ads, if I want to put an Amazon, they don't want you to be putting quotes about your product in that material unless they're from, like, so if the New York Times reviewed my book, if it was from published sources or, I have their criteria. So I just can't say Audrey Driscoll says, blah, blah, blah about my book. Although I think you did say once, blah, blah, blah. No, I'm kidding. But it wouldn't allow that. So so that planted a seed in my mind. And then when I got onto, Twitter, when I used to be there were a number of indie authors I was talking to, and there was a number of them who were like, again, it's the supportive community, so I didn't want to say they were dissing these other authors, but they were saying that it just seemed to be pretentious or a little, ridiculous to use these quotes in your tweets where, that were from reviews that readers gave. And I was like, really? So it was, I think I became shy about it. And that's why when this topic came up, I was super interested because honestly, I feel conflicted and confused. I love tuning my own horn, but if I can get other people to do it for me, even better. So, so I would love to put quotes about what people said in my advertised material, and I'm kind of currently restricted. I'm thinking of moving everything off Amazon. Mark, I mentioned that to you once, but after I get my next book ready. But so I wanted to know, what do other indie authors think? What is the current attitude towards it? So I'm just like an open book on this. Like you also, have you done that? Have you published a tweet or an advertisement or something where you're quoting, not like a something review? It had to be a review or, publication, et cetera. Or you're just saying, people from the reviewers that are in your, whatever platform you're using. So, sorry, go ahead.
Well, like you, I look at traditionally published books and they either have quotes on the back or they have 8 pages of quotes in their front matter. about how great the book is. So I just think that that's kind of par for the course.
Okay.
I think as a indie writer who doesn't have a marketing budget, one of the best ways for me to try to attract readers is to say, "Hey, look, John Doe read the book and this is what he had to say," and pull a quote out of the review to say, to show that people are liking this book. I do that regularly on Twitter. If I get a new review and there's something in it that's worth quoting and putting out there, then I put it on Twitter, I put it on Facebook. Every once in a while I might do something on my blog that, encapsulates different reviews that I've got. I do that regularly. The other thing I do is um, for instance, The Jump that I just published, in the blurb on Amazon and on the back cover, at one point, I don't remember if it was an email to me or something, Bertold said something about, "This is going to be fun, trust me." And so that's what I put in the blurb on Amazon and on the back of the book. "This is going to be fun, trust me, Bertold Gambrell," and the name
Okay,
of
so
the
you
book
quoted.
that he's authored. Yeah. I generally try to use people who are writers who have published works so that it is someone who is a writer.
Okay, and before we go around, I
So
just want to ask one follow-up because then you could also tag this on
yeah,
everybody else. Do you then ask that person for permission to do that
yes,
before? I mean, because I'm assuming
yes,
that's a yes, right? But I
yes.
just want to make sure. Okay. And
I've
Bertold said yes. I thought he would give you
yes, he did.
a hard time, but
Yes.
okay.
um, but I frequently use quotes from Carrie Rubin. Um, and if I do an ad on Facebook or whatever, I'll use a quote from her or something like that.
See,
But
that's
yeah,
such a
I will never quote someone in any of my materials without getting their permission
okay.
first.
Okay. I definitely just before everyone else answers, I just want the viewing audience out there to know that you're going to see a flurry of posts from me, and it'll be and Carrie, I'm going to be contacting you. No, kidding. but I would love for future. I mean, I'm going to every so often I do a free book giveaway, and I got one coming up soon. It'd be great to be able to include that. So okay, we can go around and see what others think.
Well,
Yeah, I don't do this much, but not because I object to it, and just because I guess I'm not on social media a lot, so I don't have
Oh, well,
anywhere really
there you go. Yeah.
to do that. And I see a lot of what people do on WordPress is if someone reviews their book on their blog, they will reblog that or link to it in their blog. So they'll say, so
Oh,
and so reviewed my book, and here's their review on their
Yeah.
blog or whatever. So yeah, I've seen that, and I think I've done it myself a few times. But in terms of extracting a quote and putting it somewhere else or putting it on the book itself, I haven't done that. I don't know why. Maybe I should. I don't see any problem with it, but I
yeah,
just haven't done it.
I've done that on social media. Like if somebody, like say Bertold reviews the book and all, I thank them and then I reblog it or repost it, I should say. But I never thought of doing that on the blog area. Okay, so but you haven't done a quote, right? I've just pulled something out and okay,
Well, if you put that right on your book, you have to have it. That person will have had to have read the book before you published it. Like as a beta reader or something.
yeah.
And I guess that's maybe why I haven't done that.
Lucinda's going, no, 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 no.
No?
What?
oh, well,
Go
so
ahead.
I was only going to repeat a story I've mentioned on here before. So, Bertold, you might want to chop it out. But I mean, I was contacted about Wednesday lunchtime, not a couple of years ago, to say, would you endorse this book and, give it a few fabulous words for the back cover? And I said, well, when do you need it by? And they said tomorrow morning. And I said, well, actually, I'm going out for supper tonight, so I don't think I'm going to be able to. You have to read it. You just have to say how wonderful it is. You know, I'll give you a synopsis of about a paragraph so you'll know what the story is and just rave about it.
Wow.
So it doesn't always work out quite as you think. Take it with a pinch of salt because if you're in the same stable as you say, Tom Clancy and J.K. Rowling and a whole load of other, really famous people, their publishers will say, give it out. So you think, oh, so and so likes it, then it's got to be good, which isn't necessarily the case at all. But the problem with shouting out about our books or reviews anyway is that, the thing is that it's 20% advertising your book and 80% chat and interacting with social media, which quite frankly is exhausting. And if you do that, you won't ever write another book again because you won't have a second worth of time. Obviously, Amazon is so against anyone paying for reviews, right? If they find out that you are putting paid reviews up, or they've been, you're paying them and they're putting reviews up, then you can have your book taken down. And I'm sure most of us probably know that by now. And if, like me, you're getting about 10 emails a day saying, your book is wonderful, and they're quoting bits from all through the book, and I'm thinking, at the beginning, I thought, wow, they must have read this thing and they really like it. So the first one I did reply to, then I found out that reviews are $25 a throw. And I said, thanks, but no thanks. Don't contact me again. I'm blocking you right now. But that's AI. It's got to be AI. Mm-hmm. Now, I review for a living, not a living. I couldn't make enough on it, but I do review. I now have to put my reviews through an AI program to show that it hasn't been plagiarized, right? There's a special link to use. And it cannot go in the main body of the reviews on Amazon. It has to go on reviewer separate column above. So if you have a look, and I looked up a book that I've reviewed, I'm just, oh, look, there's my name there, reviewed by for reader's favorite. And that is allowed, but, and the author puts that up themselves, but it can't go in the main body of all the reviews to go with the stars and all the rest of it. And the other thing that I could add is that I don't do much on social media now because it's got a lot of other stuff mixed in with it that you can't get away from, which is very depressing. Is that I just have this monthly newsletter. I hope you're all signed up. I know Audrey is, I think, and I think Richard is, but everybody is. Brilliant, absolutely brilliant. I do only one space in my newsletter do I advertise one of my books. And then I will take 3 reviews off Amazon. I must admit, I haven't sort of got back to the people because I don't know who the hell they are. And I will put snippets of, 3 short bits from the reviews that I've combed through and put it up as people who've enjoyed it. I don't put any one-star reviews up for obvious reasons. I do tend to choose the ones that I like. So that's about all I do now. But I don't see any, when I say I don't see any harm in it, it is industry norm. So I don't see that indie writers should be any different.
By the way, that's true on like a lot of the places like Goodreads and Amazon. You can get reviews from people you don't know who they are, so there's no way to really contact them. It says, okay, and even if you did and you pull that up, who wants a review by Cat Mama 132? That's the tagline. So, but there are some where I know who they are, and I could probably ask them. Okay, thanks, Steve.
But on the book,
say
just one thing I forgot. On the book, you are allowed to say perfect for readers like authors like XYZ, ABC, LMN. You can put that up, which is not exactly a review, but just basically tells people the genre.
Yeah, I've considered that too occasionally, but
sorry, Mark.
Go ahead, Mark.
I wanted to say, when it comes to putting quotes on my book or in marketing materials, I always ask for permission. I make sure it's someone I know who I can contact. But if I get a review on Goodreads from someone that I don't know, I might still put that on my blog just to say, hey, here's a new review of my book.
Okay.
The reviews are public. I'm not sure how someone could object.
Right, but it's
the review being shared somewhere else online. But but when it comes to the actual, like I said, on the book itself, or on an ad, if I decide to run an ad, I will always ask for permission for that.
Okay.
For what it's worth, I'll just say this, and I won't name names because I don't want this person to be in trouble at all. I don't think it's a problem, but there is an author whose books I've reviewed a number of, and they put quotes from my reviews, on my blog, on the cover of their books. It just says, like whatever I said, Bertold Gambrel, A Ruined Chapel by Moonlight, so the covers are actually updated with that, which I mean, I'm fine with it. I think it's kind of neat that the first time I noticed that, I was like, cool, now my name's on this book cover. So for what that's worth, yeah.
But they didn't ask you. They just did it.
No, let me. They certainly, I don't think they ever asked me even the
It's a
first time.
curiosity point.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah, and again, I mean, I'm fine with that because I posted it on my blog, so it's it's public. People could take it if they want to, but I mean, I agree. I personally would, if I were to do something like that, I would ask the person first, but I I don't mind it. Others,
I know I did one once ages ago, because I have this something with a joke. I took words, just words that were in the Amazon reviews, like funny, this, that, and then the last one, I just, put them dot, 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 dot. So funny, interesting, unique, and the last one was money back.
I I mean, there is I forget where I've seen this, but there was like a whole um expose once about movie advertising quotes about how movie studios would steal a quote from Roger Ebert or something, and they would manipulate, they wouldn't
Yeah.
change his words, but he was actually saying something negative, and they would edit it to make it sound good. So this is okay. This is a rant, but this is a thing that it does annoy me is that yes, I'm sure the big name authors are doing, like Lucinda said, all the time. They're giving quotes to books they have not read, just as the movie studios are putting misleading quotes from reviewers on their things, and they get away with this all the time. And indie authors are supposed to like, yeah, but did you get a form signed in triplicate authorized by a notary proving that this person approves you using the quote? It's one of those things, one of those imbalances that really annoys me.
Well, thank you
Unfortunately,
all for that one.
I haven't got on my paperbacks. Do you remember when we first published on Amazon? They were the large format books.
Yeah, I think
No,
I
5x7 or something. I can't
yeah,
remember
that's
what
how I
it
still have them. Yeah.
yeah. And then when they offered the smaller one, the normal size, as you might call it, sort of whatever. My other half has very kindly reformatted all my paperbacks so that they're now all the nice, neat, small size. And I went on the other day and I looked for one of my books, and it's got plenty of reviews on Kindle because that hasn't been changed. It doesn't have any reviews anymore. So I've lost them all, but I possibly must write to them and say, please, can you find the reviews and stick them up there? Because the content's exactly the same.
That's interesting. I've actually also in the back of my mind been thinking, do I do another edition and get that smaller format size? Like, I'll wait till after the next book because I'm going to review all the stuff that I have out there.
Well, they've now got a new publication date, you see. Unfortunately, I didn't really, I didn't think just by going a smaller size that they would actually change the publication date. So it's because if
I think it is a different edition.
Yeah, it's got to be considered. I think they consider a different edition, or you have to do that. Otherwise, it'll just take your book and shrink it, but you won't have different versions available. I don't know, again, something I'll look into in the future. Okay. All right. So I think thank you everyone again, because again, was, and I never have a problem saying this, but I was very naive about the whole topic. Um, Possibly even self-effacing in some points on, like I said, online where I just didn't want to, push it too hard. But we are our own advertisers in the indie world, so
Right.
Can you hear me?
Okay.
We
Yeah.
can hear you, yes, but
Me,
Okay.
are we
You
still
you all,
frozen?
you were all frozen on my screen. But I just want to mention something before we wrap up.
yeah.
Um, Once again, I'm struggling with not being able to find readers for something I've published. And one of the things I've toyed with is just posting future things on my blog or coming up with a way to sell books directly via my blog and other avenues. And I just wanted to mention, if anybody else is interested in looking into that, the woman behind Idiosyncrasy,
Right.
which I've talked about here, and I wrote a blog post about her efforts. She is now together some mechanism in which she publishes books for indie authors to sell on their websites
Right.
directly.
Mark,
I don't know a lot of details. I'm
Right.
gonna talk to her on Monday because I want to be a part of it, not just for my own personal publishing efforts, but I want to be a part of something like that that helps other indie authors too. So I'll probably write a blog post about it after I've talked to her to share the details. Who else who's interested in trying to get their books out more directly rather than going through the various platforms.
Yeah. In fact, thank you, Mark, for bringing that up because that was in the back of my mind to do a little shout out to Saffron Asteria. She runs this idiosyncrasy site. She does author interviews, etc. It's all indie based and indie positive. That's a good way to put it. And the first day when I first came across it, I really like her goals, her ad on the whole thing. And now, yeah, she just announced. I think she's only doing with one author to kind of like getting it started. So to work out, I guess, kinks or whatever, and figuring to go because she can only publish right now paper in the U.S., but it will be worldwide. So she's just doing this in stages to get it started. But yes, she's going to be doing paper publishing from her point. And yeah, so shout out to her. For those that don't follow her, she's mostly on Twitter. I'm not going to say anything. She's mostly on Twitter, but she does have a website, which is also undergoing changes and review. She's going to be updating that. And so not putting in right now because behind the scenes, there's a lot of work going on to it. So yeah.
And
Very good.
if I understand what she's trying to do correctly, this is not about making her money.
Right. This is, yeah.
It's about
The
helping
whole,
indie authors. And yeah,
she's building, in my mind, in a way, I'm probably overreaching here and say she's building a movement. she's trying to get all this indie authors have, and I think just corral it into something, again, positive, which, could be
yeah. Well, for years I've wanted to do something like what she's doing, and I
right.
kind of refer to it as a collective or a cooperative of indie authors pooling their resources, pooling their individual talents, and helping each other to get their books out there in better form and hopefully, reaching a wider audience. And I think that that's what she's trying to do. And like I said, it's something that I've wanted to try to come up with how to do this for years. So I'm happy she's figuring that out.
Yeah, I don't know how she gets the time to do all this either. But God bless her, she does. So
she's doing wonderful work.
yeah.
Okay.
I think it's a good place to end too.
Yeah, especially I'm getting signal issues too, so I don't know. The AI is trying to shut us down or something. I don't know.
AI is the perfect villain.
Yeah.
We got that.
I'm going to move AI from my antagonist to my nemesis.
Yes, exactly.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Nemesis.
In
We should have
the
talked about
personal story of Richard the Story.
Right.
Wait, I was thinking the other day, and I may or may not do this because I'm now on my site. I'm thinking about putting more short stories, and There's one that I was toying around with for, I don't know, 6 or 7 months now, is a cocktail party in the future where everyone has the little AI chip in their heads, and they're all interacting, but they're interacting using the AI chip in their heads, and the AI chip is very similar to what they have today, where it's very, like it compliments them as they're talking and saying how great they're doing and how funny they are. And meanwhile, what they're saying out loud to each other is not funny and it's kind of stupid. So I might do that. My next assault on AI.
Yes. Okay. We'll look out for that.
So,
Okay.
okay.
Everybody have wonderful holidays.
Thank
Yes,
you.
indeed.
Oh yeah, have a great holiday. Happy
Yeah.
holidays and a good new year, because we probably won't meet
Yep.
until 2026.
Talk
So
again next month. Yep.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.
Take
Bye.
care,
Bye.
everyone.